The young woman slowly stepped into the lake. The moment the cold water reached her heart, the prince appeared on the shore without warning. She had no time to retreat, so she could only sink helplessly into the water, leaving only her shoulders and the tips of her hair exposed. But the prince seemed rooted to the spot. Not only did he refuse to leave, he even shouted, "Look, there is a mermaid in the water." He thought this teasing would make the young woman panic, but she showed not the slightest weakness. Instead, she lifted her eyes, looked straight at him, and said in a cool voice that two sides struggle inside the human heart, one base and one noble. Those words only made the prince even more restless. Horatio hurriedly pulled the prince away, but in the chaos, the two of them fell into the lake together. He is Hamlet, the most tragic prince in Shakespeare's world. This story is also Shakespeare's most celebrated work, representing the highest achievement of literature in the Western Renaissance. Let us step into today's classic adaptation, Ophelia. Ophelia's father was an important minister at court, and her mother died young. Because her father was busy with state affairs all day and rarely disciplined her, she grew up with a free and unruly nature. She spent her days looking unkempt, running and playing through the streets and alleys. After her brother was sent to school, she became even more idle. One day, she and her playmates accidentally wandered into a royal banquet celebrating the prince turning 15 and entering university. At that moment, the king's brother, Claudius, rose to give a speech. On the surface, he congratulated the prince for soon leaving the queen's protection, but beneath his words was sarcasm meant to belittle him. The prince was about to rise in anger, but to everyone's surprise, Ophelia, hiding under the table, struck back for him first. She said that in this matter, the apple itself was innocent. Only then did everyone notice her. Her father hurried to smooth things over, removing her worn-out hat and revealing a head of messy hair. But the queen gently cupped Ophelia's dirty face, wiped away the grime, and studied her carefully. Though this face was still unpolished, it already carried the faint promise of future beauty. Her father said his daughter lacked proper upbringing because her mother had died early, yet Ophelia's unhidden honesty deeply moved the queen. She solemnly announced that she would take responsibility for raising Ophelia into adulthood. The next day, Ophelia was brought into the palace. The ladies-in-waiting bathed her, dressed her hair, and put her in new clothes. Several years passed in the blink of an eye, and she indeed grew into a bright and lovely young woman. But the palace rules were strict, and for someone born to love freedom, every step felt as if she were walking inside an invisible cage. The maids gossiped behind her back, saying her father was nothing but a social climber who knew how to flatter his way upward. Her hair ornaments were only flowers. Because her father had no money to buy her jewels, she only wore common clothes, and her whole body smelled of earth. And yet the queen favored her above all. Every night, because the candlelight hurt her eyes, the queen would call Ophelia to sit by her bed and read poetry aloud. The other maids could only watch from afar as the wild girl became the only one allowed to remain at the queen's side. The queen once told her that she had not actually grown up in the palace. She and her sister had been sent to a convent in France when they were young. Whenever others bullied her, her sister would always step forward to protect her. That night, Ophelia discovered that what she was reading was not a prayer book. The queen said it was something more important than prayer. Nervously, Ophelia began reading those words that made her blush and her heart race. Though the candlelight was dim, she still saw a dazzling glow flicker in the queen's eyes. At a royal ball, the guests danced gracefully. The king was discussing important matters with several ministers, too busy to notice the weary queen beside him. Just then, the king's brother approached with a smile and invited the queen to dance. After receiving the king's permission, the two stepped onto the dance floor. The music was gentle, and figures swayed around them. Before the song had ended, they slipped away hand in hand while no one was watching, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. This hidden scene fell into Ophelia's eyes with perfect clarity. Time passed, and the prince returned to the castle from his studies abroad. While everyone was lost in joyful noise, Ophelia only wanted quiet. She quietly left the banquet and went to bathe in the lake. Who would have thought that there she would run into the prince? The prince said that sure enough, a marvelous fish lived in these woods. He asked whether the fish would like to come ashore. Ophelia said no fish would willingly come to the fisherman. Your Highness, the girl showed no weakness. Instead, she slowly stood up and said there were two people inside his heart, one noble and one vile. Horatio pulled the prince away, but the two of them fell into the lake together. Ophelia took the chance to escape. Back in the palace, the queen was admiring an unfinished tapestry with her maids. Ophelia softly began telling the story in the picture. Legend says that a lover once accidentally saw a goddess bathing in the forest, and in her fury, the the goddess punished him by turning him into a stag, doomed to wander forever through the woods where he once hunted. The prince suddenly laughed softly and said only that the goddess in the picture looked rather old. The air instantly froze. The tapestry maid, who had remained silent, quietly explained that the goddess's face in the picture had been modeled after the queen. The smile on the queen's face cooled at once. She ordered the maid to pull out the threads and begin again. The queen was sensitive by nature. She knew all too well that her beauty could not withstand the erosion of time, and the prince's words just now were undoubtedly a bitterly cold wind. While the maid searched around, she quietly slipped into the shadows of the corridor. Just then, Claudius happened to pass by. He saw that the queen's tear marks had not yet dried. This was exactly the opportunity he had long been waiting for. He said that if he were the prince, he would certainly care about his mother's feelings. The sudden kiss left the queen frozen in place. After a brief shock, years of neglect and her longing for comfort in this moment intertwined, and she could not help but respond with equal passion. Claudius whispered in her ear that he would wait for her on the west side of the castle tonight. The implication in his words was unmistakable. The queen hurriedly fixed her makeup and quietly disappeared at the end of the corridor, but she never imagined that everything in that secret entanglement had been seen by Ophelia not far outside the window. Ophelia was deeply unsettled, the shocking scene replaying again and again in her mind. Suddenly, the prince interrupted her thoughts. She turned and met the prince's eyes, bright as if filled with starlight. Just as the prince was about to kiss her, the castle bell rang. Ophelia rose and avoided him, but the prince took the chance to pull the red ribbon from her hair. Back in the palace, Claudius, who was practicing swordplay, called out to the prince. Seeing the red ribbon on him, Claudius mocked him for already carrying a girl's token. The prince was enraged. His sword strikes were fierce as he pressed forward step by step, finally holding his blade to his uncle's throat. He turned away after withdrawing his sword, never expecting his uncle to launch a sneak attack from behind. The prince was knocked backward by the sudden blow and finally fell heavily onto the grass. The queen then gave her own scarf to Claudius as a reward, and all of this was seen by the king from afar. Out of the corner of her eye, the queen noticed the king. Her hand jerked back as if burned by flame. Shame surged over her like a tide, but what followed was a twisted, revenge-like pleasure. That evening, the masquerade ball began. The women wore flowers and jewels in their hair, colorful masks covering their faces as they spun through the hall. The prince moved through the noisy crowd and grabbed Ophelia by the wrist. When partners switched, the prince smiled happily even at a maid. Ophelia once again accidentally noticed the queen and Claudius exchanging secret glances. She turned and hurried away. Walking toward a quiet corner, the prince seemed to sense something was wrong and quickly followed her out. He handed Ophelia a cup of wine and said that some people believe drinking from the same cup is a kind of vow. In that moment, the world seemed to stop turning. Ophelia's heartbeat became chaotic and urgent in that kiss. Then she fled in panic. Summer was about to end, and the prince was leaving for Wittenberg to continue his studies. Ophelia's heart was full of anger. The prince had not told her he was leaving soon, yet the night before, he had stolen a kiss from her. But the prince chased after her closely, facing the anger on her face. He said nothing, offering only an urgent kiss, as if that kiss could dissolve all her misunderstanding and rage. And in truth, it did. The prince asked her to try to understand him. Ophelia said she was trying. The prince said his father would never allow them to be together, because his father hoped he would one day inherit the throne. Ophelia knew the difference in their status, but hearing the prince say it himself brought an unspeakable ache to her heart. She knew very well that the fairy tale of Cinderella and the prince would never play out in her own life. On the day the prince left, he said goodbye to his parents, but his eyes kept searching through the crowd, as if looking for someone. In the end, he did not see that familiar figure. At that moment, Ophelia was standing in the shadows, secretly watching him leave. That night, the queen ordered Ophelia to go into the forest beside the castle, find a mysterious woman, and bring something back from her. The queen warned her that no matter what, it must be done in secret, and she must not see the woman's face. The next day, Ophelia disguised herself, put on a cloak, held the bottle tightly in her hand, and quietly walked into the forest. At last, she found a hidden cave entrance. She took a deep breath and slowly stepped inside. The sight before her nearly made her forget to breathe. The place was filled with mysterious herbs, ancient bottles, and all kinds of strange objects. Just then, a woman's voice asked what she wanted. Ophelia said she had been sent by the queen. Then the woman warned her not to touch the things beside her. Even a light touch would numb the hands and feet, and if bitten, a person would lose their life. Ophelia was stunned to see that the healer before her looked exactly like the queen. The healer seemed to realize something and immediately turned away. She poured the potion into the bottle and urged Ophelia to leave at once. That evening, just after Ophelia put down the medicine, she heard the king and queen arguing. All the luxury and power seemed meaningless in that moment. She was no longer the noble queen, but only a neglected woman, a lonely soul struggling beneath her husband's indifference. Though she possessed everything, the warmth she longed for in her heart was never answered. She put on her cloak, lifted a candle, and disappeared down the palace corridor. Ophelia quietly followed her. At last, by the castle fence, the queen mysteriously vanished. Suddenly, a man appeared. Ophelia immediately sought help from the guards, only to find that the dark figure had already disappeared. The next morning, the castle suddenly rang with cries that the king had died. It turned out that the king had been bitten by a snake in the garden and died from poison. The queen's anguished screams cut through the castle. The servants silently wiped the king's body. Weak light spilled through the window onto the king. The air around them was heavy, and the castle seemed covered by dark clouds. After the king's funeral, the king's brother Claudius became the new king. He soon married the queen. On the very day of their wedding, the prince finally returned and burst into the ceremony. The pain in his heart turned into fury. The queen said, "Hamlet, you have come back too late." The new king said yes, too late to pay respect to his late father. Hamlet mocked him, saying this was what men were, seducing women and stealing crowns. The new king told him to remember his place. The prince thought his mother would step forward to defend him, but the queen only stepped back 2 paces and coldly signaled for him to bow. At that moment, a tearing pain surged through his heart. He was no longer heir to the throne, and even his mother no longer spoke for him. Helplessly, he lowered his noble head, bowed to the new king, and then stormed away. One day, Ophelia saw several men harassing a girl. She shouted at them to stop, but the ringleaders surrounded her. Just when she had no way out, the prince drew his sword and angrily forced the men back. The prince followed Ophelia closely, saying he had not forgotten her for a single day. He regretted the things he had said to her that summer, but without realizing it, he followed her into the queen's chamber. Hearing his mother's voice, he dropped the ribbon in his hand and turned away. Seeing her son's back, the queen was deeply surprised. Ophelia took the chance to pick up the red ribbon from the floor. Her brother was going to France to continue his studies. Before leaving, he warned Ophelia that the palace atmosphere was strange. Rumors were everywhere, and serving those in power was like walking beside a tiger. Staying away from the prince was the best way to protect herself. Their father told his son to finish his studies and return soon. Horatio had been devoted to studying medicine. He told Ophelia that the prince was in great pain and only wanted to see her once, and that he would wait for her on the city wall at midnight. That night, Ophelia arrived as promised. To avoid the sentries, they squeezed into a corner of the wall. The prince said she was the queen's closest maid, and only she knew the queen's secrets. He asked Ophelia whether his mother had been faithful to his father, faithful to her husband. Ophelia said she could not tell him. Ophelia comforted him. The prince called her his true love. Overcome by feeling, they could not help but kiss. The next day, Ophelia went into the forest again to fetch medicine for the queen. At the cave entrance, she saw a man coming out. She hurriedly hid behind a large rock. A snake passed over her foot, yet she still held her breath. Only after the man had gone far away did she enter the cave. This time, the healer was not very friendly. The healer said the queen could get whatever she wanted. She was only afraid of feeling her true self. The healer slowly began speaking of why she had become the person she was now. When she was 19, she became pregnant. The child's father swore he would marry her, but the child did not survive, dying before it was born. Rumors said she was a witch, and that the devil was at work. The villagers began saying that only by putting her to death could they drive out the evil. Luckily, she was skilled with poison. With just 3 drops on the tongue, she would fall into a false death. 3 days later, she woke, took the antidote, and survived. Ophelia asked, "And where is the child's father now?" A trace of loneliness flashed in the healer's eyes as she said he had recently married. That day, the prince disguised himself as a priest and told Ophelia to dress as a shepherdess and wait for him at the old chapel by the lake the next morning. He wanted to marry Ophelia, and afterward, they would quietly leave this place. The next day, the two disguised themselves as commoners, with a gentle flock of sheep beside them. Before the priest, they exchanged rings and made eternal vows. 2 hearts that truly loved each other were finally no longer bound by status and came together. At dawn, Ophelia came to the queen's chamber. The queen asked why she had heard that Ophelia wore a peasant girl's clothes and was with a common boy, and why she would lower herself like that. Just then, the new king walked in. Ophelia recognized him as the figure she had seen at the cave entrance. Inside the cloak, she also felt the medicine bottle, which made her even more certain. The new king also noticed something strange about her and asked whether his nephew had fallen in love with her. Ophelia denied it, but the new king spotted the prince's ring threaded onto the ribbon at her chest. Everything was already clear without words. He deliberately let Ophelia and the prince be alone together while he stood by the window and listened in secret. Ophelia said loudly, "Stop these childish games." She had something to give the prince. At the same time, she lowered her voice and said that the king was watching them from the shadows. She told the prince that she had once seen his uncle in the forest, at a place where poisons were made, and that day was the very day the old king died. So the old king was killed not by a snake, but by ambition. Only then did the prince understand that his uncle had also stolen his crown. Before leaving, the prince told Ophelia that she must stay away from this dangerous castle. He told her to go to the convent the queen had visited when she was young, to eliminate future trouble. The new king told Ophelia's father that he would arrange his daughter's marriage as soon as possible. At the evening banquet, the prince acted like a fool, wild and unhinged. The guests looked at one another, believing he must have gone mad from grief. The prince said that next, they would perform a tragic story. A huge curtain dropped, and the performance began. On the painted cloth, the king and queen sat in a peaceful garden. The king rested beneath a large tree. Suddenly, a few drops of dew from the tree gently fell onto the back of the king's neck. In an instant, the king was in terrible pain and collapsed to the ground, and the tree behind him twisted and transformed into a man. He put on the crown and married the queen. All of this seemed to be telling the story of how the new king came to power. The new king was furious below the stage. He roared that he was the king, filled with hatred. The new king stared at the prince and spat out a few words, saying this was treason. The performers from moments ago were all sent to the chopping block. The queen crossed the restless crowd and grabbed Ophelia. She had thought Ophelia's lover was lowborn, never expecting his status to be so noble. The queen said she had raised Ophelia like a mother, yet Ophelia had made her son betray her. The queen warned her to stay away from Hamlet. Her father was anxious and realized disaster was coming. He went to plead with the queen, never knowing this would become his final farewell to Ophelia. Early in the morning, Horatio found Ophelia and told her that something had happened to her father. At the door, she ran into soldiers escorting the prince away. The prince begged Ophelia to forgive him. It turned out that he had mistaken Ophelia's father for his uncle and killed him by mistake. Ophelia was almost destroyed. She asked Horatio where the prince was. Horatio said the new king had ordered the prince to England. The palace fell into chaos. After learning of their father's death, her brother returned in fury, determined to avenge him. The new king said the murderer was the prince. The queen hurriedly explained that it was all a misunderstanding and told him he must think of his sister. Elsewhere, Ophelia was dressing herself. Today was supposed to be her wedding day. She said sadly that she was already married. If the prince died, she would die as well. But the maid mocked her, saying that would make her a widow now, wouldn't it? Ophelia immediately understood the meaning behind those words. After pressing her, the maid finally revealed that once the ship set sail, the prince would be pushed into the sea. The ship had already departed yesterday. Ophelia stood in despair at the edge of the castle. The mountains and rivers before her seemed to blur into a ruined painting. Flocks of swallows danced wildly in the sky, and every future had already turned into nothing. She only wanted to follow the prince and leave all of this behind with him. Suddenly, Horatio's voice interrupted her thoughts. He said there had been no wind last night, so the ship had not sailed and was still in place. Only then did Ophelia, who had been ready to die, feel relief. The only thought in her heart was that she had to find the prince, no matter what. She no longer cared about any obstacle. She only wanted to see him one more time. Just then, someone asked Horatio whether he had seen Ophelia. The whole city was now searching for her. The new king had ordered all gates closed, allowing no one in or out. Ophelia found an exit but could not open it. And just then, the new king found her. The new king had already learned from the priest that the two had married.
Now if you were my child...
Your only child died before he drew breath. They called his mother a witch and made her burn her. But you know so already. It was you that turned the village against the woman who loved you.
He drew his knife, intending to silence her. Fortunately, someone appeared, and Ophelia was spared. The man who had once harassed Ophelia in the street was the groom the new king had arranged for her. Ophelia kicked him where it hurt and seized the chance to escape. Everyone fell silent, watching this madwoman. Holding the bouquet she had woven, she gently touched her brother's forehead, then sat beside the queen who had once been like a mother to her. Rue for regret, rosemary, pansies, and columbine were woven together into the bouquet. She gave them to the queen. After rising, she said to Horatio that she hoped he would see her one last time before her body grew cold. She told Horatio to remember to dig up her body, because he could use it for his anatomy lessons. Finally, she came before the new king and threw down a sprig of fennel. Insulting him, the new king ordered the soldiers to seize her, but the queen said, "Let her go. The poor girl has gone mad." The new king had no choice but to order them to take her out of his sight. Even so, the new king still sent people to follow Ophelia. The queen, full of anxiety, also ran after her. Ophelia ran desperately, hearing the soldiers behind her. She fled in panic and hid beneath an old tree. Trembling, she took out the porcelain bottle, tilted her head back, and drank 3 drops of the deep blue poison. Her steps grew heavy as she moved toward the center of the lake. The poison suddenly took effect, and as the world spun around her, she collapsed straight into the water, her body rolling and sinking beyond her control. On the shore, soldiers held the queen tightly by the arms, and she could only watch helplessly as Ophelia struggled in the water. The moment the glass bottle in her hand sank to the bottom of the lake, she became completely one with nature. This image was frozen forever. 3 days later, Horatio opened the coffin lid, and Ophelia woke weakly. They moved through the forest and saw a group of soldiers wearing armor. Horatio said they were scouts, enemies from Norway, and they were steadily marching toward the castle. Ophelia told him to hurry back and warn everyone. While she went to the cave, the healer quickly helped her drink the antidote. Ophelia said she had just seen many soldiers. She also said that she had kept the healer's secret, while the healer had helped the new king murder the old king, but the healer hurriedly denied it, saying the old king was killed by the new king, and that she had simply been unable to refuse him. She lowered her head and murmured that she had once loved him, and he had once loved her. But Ophelia told her the truth. It was the new king who spread rumors that the healer was a witch, incited a mob to attack her, and allowed her to be burned. The new king had admitted all of this himself. The healer looked confused, but refused to believe it. She helped Ophelia onto the bed to rest, then carried a candle and disappeared into the heavy night. Suddenly, the queen entered. When she saw Ophelia, she thought she was seeing Ophelia's ghost. Ophelia forced herself to speak, saying the new king had driven the queen's sister toward ruin. The man the queen's sister had loved was the very man sleeping beside the queen. The queen's face instantly lost all color. She could not believe that the husband she loved so deeply could harbor such filthy intentions. She begged Ophelia to forgive her. Then she revealed that Ophelia's brother and the prince had agreed to a duel. Ophelia had to go stop them. The queen cut off Ophelia's long red hair and dressed her as a boy to keep the new king from recognizing her. On the day of the final duel, the new king handed Laertes a cold, gleaming sword and said he had coated the blade with poison, urging him to fight bravely. Ophelia softly called out to the prince. Only when the prince heard that familiar voice did he realize the Ophelia he had missed so desperately was still alive. She begged the prince to stop the duel and go with her to the convent, but the prince said he had already sworn revenge. Ophelia's heart sank completely. Grief and helplessness became a single sigh. She said no more, turned, and climbed into the small wooden boat by the lake. With effort, she rowed the boat away from the castle. During the duel, Laertes cut the prince's arm with his sword, and the prince struck back, stabbing him in the shoulder. The poison spread quickly through the wound. The prince felt the world spin and collapsed straight to the ground. Seeing the poison take hold of her son, the queen felt as if her heart were being torn apart. She stared hard at the calm-faced new king beside her, finally seeing through the man's malice and cruelty. Overwhelming hatred and despair surged into her heart. The queen suddenly picked up the fallen sword and rushed toward the new king with everything she had, each step firm and filled with the resolve to perish with him. By the time the new king sensed something was wrong, the queen was already right before him. The moment the long sword pierced his chest, their eyes met. The new king saw the killing intent and disgust in the queen's eyes. It was a coldness he had never seen before. He never imagined that after all his scheming, he would ultimately die at the hands of a woman he had considered weak. The queen trembled as she picked up the poisoned bottle that had fallen from her hand. At that moment, Laertes also collapsed heavily as the poison fully took effect. Amid the wreckage and spreading grief, the palace gates were suddenly smashed open. The queen's sister, dressed in plain clothes, led a vast army from a neighboring kingdom rushing in. The once arrogant castle finally met its end. The queen tasted with her own mouth the bitter fruit she had brewed, but by the time she finally woke to the truth, Everything was already beyond repair. With trembling hands, she picked up the poison, and without the slightest hesitation, drank it all. Her sister cried out beside her with heartbreaking desperation, screaming until her voice was raw. But she still could not bring back the queen's fading mind. An uncontrollable anger surged into the sister's heart. She hated the new king's hypocrisy and cruelty, hated that he had used love as bait to toy with two innocent sisters, making them pay for his ambition and selfish desires. She hated herself even more for not stopping her sister back then, and for so easily believing a man's sweet lies. And by lending out the poison, she had indirectly become one of the forces driving this tragedy. The sister looked up and cried to the heavens, her sorrowful wails shaking the palace. By now, the palace had already become a living hell, with blood everywhere and bodies across the ground. The kingdom that had once stood at the height of glory collapsed amid endless killing and conflict. Ophelia seemed to sense all of this from far away. After many turns, she finally arrived at the convent where the queen had lived as a child. There, she lived with her daughter, far from the noise and conflict of the world. Life was plain, but hidden within it was the most grounded warmth and peace. She said she had not lost herself in revenge. Instead, she had found the road toward hope. She hoped that one day, she could tell the story that belonged to her.